I think Canadians recognize that we are in an unprecedented pandemic right now. The next step will be producing the vaccines in a sufficient number to inoculate everyone or almost everyone. As to what sort of vaccination protocols will be in place, we still have a fair bit of time to reflect on that in order to get it right. A vaccine will be extremely important to getting back to normal. Our priority will always be to ensure an adequate and safe supply for Canadians first and foremost. We are busy increasing our investments in a pharmaceutical investment in a pharmaceutical industry in Canada. In the weeks and months ahead, our government will continue to take the steps needed to make sure Canada gets a COVID-19 vaccine as soon as possible.
Let's use our shared power, not just to get a vaccine, but to get it out to everyone.
We've reached an agreement with AstraZeneca for the vaccine they are developing with the University of Oxford. This agreement secures up to 20 million doses for Canadians. Today, I can announce that the Government of Canada has signed 2 new agreements with Novavax and Johnson & Johnson to reserve millions of doses of the vaccines they're developing. Taken together, our vaccine agreements with Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax and Johnson & Johnson will give Canada at least 88 million doses.
88 million doses.
With options to attain tens of millions more. I can also announce that we're investing over $126 million to expand the biomanufacturing facility right here at the National Research Council Royal Mount. We expect the facility to be up and running by mid-2021.
We need to get vaccinated to get through this pandemic. It is time for people to get vaccinated. For those who are hesitant, to go and get their first doses and their second doses. That's why I've asked the Clerk of the Privy Council, who is responsible for the Federal Public Service, to look at mandatory vaccinations for federal employees. And we're also looking at federally regulated industries to encourage or perhaps even to mandate vaccinations for those industries. By getting vaccinated, be able to get back more and more to normal, get back more and more to regular life. For that, those who are hesitant, it's time to get your vaccine. They are safe, they are effective, and we're going to continue following science and the recommendations of NACI and our public health officers when it comes to further boosters. But right now, we know that getting vaccinated with 2 doses of an approved vaccine in Canada is the best way to keep yourself safe, including from the Delta virus.
Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up! Lock him up!
No more lockdowns!
No more lockdowns! No more lockdowns! No more lockdowns! No more lockdowns! No more lockdowns! No more lockdowns! No more lockdowns!
Blaring horns, impassable streets and distressed citizens. All of this is the work of a movement that calls itself the Freedom Convoy.
In Ottawa, where protesters have been camped out for 2 weeks now. Travis, what's the status of things there tonight?
Well, Asha, this protest, it is still going strong. And as we head into the 3rd weekend, the crowds are growing once again, and nothing politicians are saying seems to be making much of a difference.
This pandemic doesn't end because we cross our arms and decide that it's over.
It is time for order to be restored. The message from a prime minister short on specifics on how this all ends.
This unlawful activity has to end, and it will end. Of course, I can't say too much more now as to exactly when or how this ends, because unfortunately we are concerned about violence.
even as those concerns grow, as of right now, Trudeau is not considering deploying the military.
The Freedom Convoy of truckers continuing to press their point on vaccine mandates. The mayor of Ottawa asking the Canadian government for an additional 1,800 police officers to deal with the protests. The demonstrations creating a traffic jam in the U.S. even after truckers temporarily shut down a bridge that connects Detroit with Canada. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is ramping up his criticisms, even comparing them to Nazis. Media outlets using terms like sedition and threat to democracy to describe the protest.
Just think of the language. I know it sounds familiar to you, right? A threat to democracy, an insurrection, sedition.
We've heard it called a nationwide insurrection.
The movement is being called an insurrection by some, paralyzing the Canadian capital.
Those with the so-called Freedom Convoy say they're staying put.
It's a cult.
Yes, it is.
It's not a so-called Freedom Convoy. It is called the Freedom Convoy, Greg.
Yes. They're so stupid.
The media angle, please.
This is a class issue going on right now. They just don't like the working class. What's his face? The bozo who's the
Trudeau.
Right, Trudeau. Just an elite cupcake. But what you're seeing right now is bad appling. That's what they do, is they try to find the worst example of your group and generalize it to the whole. And then when they can't find one, they make it up.
So Justin Trudeau, had he read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, he could have gone to see them early on and nipped it in the bud. Instead, now he's calling them Nazis.
You mean the elite cupcake? Delicious. I just am so impressed that Canada's making news. I've been in this business for 20 years. I think we had the mayor who smoked crack in Toronto.
Yeah.
I haven't heard a peep from Canada since the crack-smoking mayor, so bravo, Canada.
Justin Trudeau gave additional comments today. They would like me to play these, and then I'll get your take on it. Here we go.
We're all frustrated. We're all sick and tired of restrictions, of mandates. I can understand frustrations with mandates, but mandates are the way to avoid further restrictions.
He's full of it.
It's not just truckers, right? So it's truckers, but then it's all of these other people across the country of Canada and in America who have said, we agree with you because the government is just so overly heavy-handed. And it's not just mask mandates and the vaccines, but that is really, if they could get to a deal on that, maybe the truckers would go home.
But to me, I support these truckers. This is about people saying we're going to join together. We're fed up with you and your nonsense and your make-believe this and that and everything changes. And I'm vaccinated. For all of you who are going to send me hate mail, I'm vaccinated, okay? But enough is enough. We're damaging children. And there you had him. He had a mask on. Earlier, he didn't have a mask on. And the same with, Stacey Abrams. It's enough. Stop. End it.
Justin Trudeau. What? You're laughing, but Justin Trudeau, I mean, I thought he was kind of a cool guy. Then I started to read what he said. This is a couple of weeks ago. He was, or maybe this is September, but he was talking about people who are not vaccinated. He said they don't believe in science. They're often misogynistic, often racist. No, they're not.
That was not smart of him at all.
Right. He said, but they take up space. And with that, we have to make a choice in terms of a leader as a country. Do we tolerate these people? It's like, tolerate them. Now you do sound like Hitler.
That was...
And recently he talked about them holding unacceptable views.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear that Trudeau said those things.
You didn't see the blackface? I mean, he's no, I'm kidding about that. I'm not. I mean, that was not a good look for him. But, I mean, come on. I mean, that's, I think, what gets under people's skin.
Some disturbing images from Canada in the last few days. Thousands of truckers are laying siege to their biggest cities. We are reminded of Trudeau's unsolicited advice to India last year. Today, the same Trudeau is in hiding.
Convoy of truckers making their way to the Canadian capital of Ottawa over the weekend. Thousands of protesters protesting on the streets against the COVID rules and vaccine mandates. The situation in Canada has been unprecedented. So much so that certain reports indicate that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his family were shifted to a safe house amid the anti-government sentiment. In fact, many experts and global political observers have compared the situation in Canada to not just the US capital siege, but also the year-long protests by certain groups on the outskirts of Delhi. Canadian politicians like a certain Jagmeet Singh, who slandered India during the farmers' protest, is now calling the protesting truckers extremist elements. And the Canadian Prime Minister, who had stood by the protesters in India last year, has now reportedly gone into hiding when a similar protest is raging on the streets of his capital city.
The situation is concerning, and we're all very worried about family and friends. I know that's the reality for many of you. Let me remind you, Canada will always be there to defend the right of peaceful protest. I want to make something very clear. The illegal blockades seeking to take our neighborhoods and our economy hostage, and the collective COVID fatigue we are facing are two very separate things. If you joined the protests because you're tired of COVID, you now need to understand that you are breaking laws. The consequences are becoming more and more severe. You don't want to end up losing your license, end up with a criminal record, which will impact your job, your livelihood, even your ability to travel internationally, including to the US. We've heard your frustration with COVID, with the measures that are there to keep people safe. We've heard you. It's time to go home now.
The truckers are in it for the long haul. They're not going to stop until the mandates are lifted. Now, 2 Canadian provinces are dropping pandemic mandates, Alberta and Saskatchewan, and truckers have sparked protest movements worldwide in the U.S., in Alaska, and possibly from California to Washington. What's your take on what's happening, sir?
I think this is a real test for our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is only 40 years old, where your Bill of Rights is over 200 years old. And this is the first real test of whether written individual rights and freedoms really mean something in this country.
And to the people who are tired of this pandemic, that is, all Canadians, I want you to be able to get back to the things that you love.
We're fighting a virus. We're not fighting each other.
First to you, Mr. Wilson, the blockade at the border, a second U.S. to Canada crossing blocked by truckers protesting mandates. This is the Alberta with Montana crossing, the Ambassador Bridge between Ontario and Detroit blocked. Mr. Wilson, the Prime Minister Trudeau says the protesters are fringe extremists, racists, and Nazis. What do you say?
It's troubling that the Prime Minister of our country is now characterizing hard-working Canadians who during COVID delivered food and critical supplies and put themselves at risk to whatever risk it posed. And now suddenly for political opportunism, he's characterizing these hardworking truckers who are trying to protect their charter rights, who are trying to ensure that they're not discriminated against and have freedom of choice, as somehow being a fringe element. I think Canadians took offense to it. And as you've seen across our country, this was a spontaneous event. This was not organized. These events that are occurring at various borders are not coordinated by any operations center. This is Canadians saying we've had enough. Government overreach has gone too far, and we need our fundamental rights back, and it needs to stop now.
And to Canadians at home, watching in disgust and disbelief at this behavior, wondering how this could have happened in our nation's capital after everything we've been through together, this is not the story of our pandemic. I think if this pandemic has shown us anything, it's that there are gaps that have long existed and cracks within which our most vulnerable can slip. But we've also seen this pandemic reveal gaps and cracks. So we're going to continue to unapologetically focus on Canadians. We respect and we will continue to respect this pandemic. In this pandemic particularly, because of this pandemic and because we need to make sure we are strong and able to protect Canadians going forward without the same reliance on international supply chains. No country can get past this pandemic until we're all past it.
They're confused when they see countries around the world like Ireland
Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, the Czech Republic, Israel, Denmark, Spain, and the UK, who have either dropped almost all restrictions or are fast moving in that direction. All countries, I note, with lower vaccination rates than us.
We made a commitment to protect Canadians. Every government has a responsibility to protect Canadians, and that's why we look forward to working with provinces across all jurisdictions.
Obviously, I respect provincial jurisdiction in running those institutions, but we've seen that those institutions haven't done a good enough job in our institutions. And to not take the moment of this crisis to reflect on how we can improve outcomes for everyone would be completely irresponsible. We need to make sure that every Canadian is protected. That's one of the roles of the federal government. And we're happy to work with the provinces to ensure that we can look Canadians in the eye and say, no matter where you live, your loved ones will be well taken care of.
Trudeau also likes to position himself as a proud feminist. He says he has no tolerance for sexual harassment. In August 2000, a female reporter accused him of having groped her at a music festival. Trudeau apparently apologized. The controversy died down. In 2018, 3 years after he became the Prime Minister of Canada, it resurfaced. Trudeau was questioned about this incident and his apology, and this is what he had to say.
If I apologized later, then it would be because I sensed that she was not entirely comfortable with the interaction we had. I apologized in the moment. I certainly feel that again, I don't want to speak for her. I don't want to presume how she feels now.
We're not done with the apologies yet. Justin Trudeau likes to project himself as a champion of equality, but time and again his carefully cultivated image of the poster boy liberal has been called into serious question by pictures and images like these. This is the righteous Mr. Trudeau dressed up as Aladdin in a turban and robes and brown face makeup at a party in 2001. And this is again the virtuous Mr. Trudeau wearing black face makeup and an afro wig, apparently singing a Jamaican song. This one's from his school yearbook. What did Justin Trudeau have to say about these images? No prizes for guessing.
I didn't see that from the layers of privilege that I have. So even though we've moved forward in significant ways as a government, what I did, the choices I made, hurt people who thought I was an ally. I am an ally, but this is something that obviously I deeply regret and I never should have done.
If I had $1 for every time Justin Trudeau apologized, I'd be swimming in cash. This man is the quintessential Canadian. He just loves to say sorry.
Today, I'm glad to be here as Prime Minister talking about how important it is for all Canadians to get vaccinated. But I'm also going to be playing the role of a dad of a 7-year-old who is going to get his vaccine this afternoon with me. And we're very excited about that. And I'm happy to share my perspective and hear from all of you on the questions you have. And of course, lean on a great doctor to have the proper scientific answers and not just my answers. We all want to make sure we're keeping our kids safe. Of course, as Prime Minister, I've been encouraging everyone to stay safe and get vaccinated and do the right things. But today I'm joining not just as Prime Minister, but also as a dad of a 7-year-old. We're going to get vaccinated this afternoon. Hadrian's very excited about that, sort of, because I promised him chocolate.
Is the vaccine safe? Is there any side effects that I should know about?
Great question, Bryn. What a pleasure to see you and your sister here today. A lot of people asking that question. I've been asking that question for about a year as we've been getting Canadians vaccinated. A lot of people want to know, is the vaccine safe? First thing we got to know is COVID-19 isn't safe. It's dangerous. We need to keep protected from this terrible disease that has killed so many people in Canada and around the world and gotten others really, really, really sick. So that's why we work so hard on getting vaccines. But we all need to make sure that things like vaccines are safe for Canadians. And I can tell you that around the world, different countries have health scientists who look very carefully at the vaccines to make sure they're safe, to look at all the tests that have been done, to examine them carefully. And of all the different agencies around the world, Health Canada is one of the very, very best. It's one of those agencies that countries around the world who maybe don't have such strong agencies look at Canada and a couple of other countries to say, well, if the Canadians have decided that this is safe to use, then maybe we don't have to check it as carefully because we can trust them. So Canadians can absolutely trust Health Canada and all the scientists and all the doctors who've looked at these vaccines and concluded without a doubt the best thing to do to keep you safe from COVID-19 and to get through this as a country, as a community, is to get vaccinated. And people have also heard, well, these are new vaccines, and they've been done quicker than it usually takes years and years and years to approve a vaccine. Well, the reason it was able to be done quicker is because we threw more money and more people to do the work than ever had been done before to get a vaccine, because it was so important to get it right. There wasn't any shortcuts taken, there weren't any steps skipped. The full approval was done. It was just done with a lot more people and a lot more attention on it than ever before. So that's how you can know that vaccines absolutely are safe. And I know that because doctors like Sharkawi and others like Abdul have reassured me about it, but I'll turn to him for the question on side effects and reinforce the safety. Abdul, go ahead.
I've heard that COVID-19 is not usually serious in children. What are the benefits for kids to get vaccinated?
Great question. So we have to remember that even though side effects or the problems that can arise from COVID may be less common in kids, that doesn't mean that they can't occur. And that doesn't mean that if they do occur, they can't be very, very, very serious. And that can include anything from serious breathing difficulties to learning difficulties to difficulties with concentration and a lot of things that never quite go away. And we hear about this term long COVID. That happens in kids. We don't know exactly how often it happens in kids. And the estimates range from 2% to maybe even as high as 5%, depending on where you're looking. That's something that may never go away. And we want to prevent our kids from ever having to go through that. We also want to remember that even if they don't get sick, again, they can spread the virus to others, including their parents, and people in their homes, in their communities, their grandparents, other people who are at much greater risk. So if we put a clamp on COVID-19 and prevent it from spreading from anyone, even if they have minimal symptoms, that's a great thing that kids can do for their families and their communities. We're in this together.
Does the vaccine hurt?
Well, Jackson, that's a good question. I'm not going to tell you it's all fun to get a vaccine. You are getting a shot, and it's a pinch and a poke, and it's not all that much fun. But I know I promised my kids treats after they got their vaccines. But mostly, what's important is it's just a little moment that is a pinch, and then you are so much safer afterwards. You're going to be able to do so many more things without being worried, without your parents being worried. That it's one of those moments where you have to be brave and just say, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do. We all have to get asked to do things that we're not crazy about doing, whether it's cleaning up a room or eating food we don't like, but it's on our plate and we have to. This is one of those things that I know Jackson and all the other kids, you're going to be able to just breathe and squeeze your stuffy or squeeze your mom and dad's hands while you get it. It'll be over in a second, and then so much will be better. That I know you're able to do it. I know all the kids out there are going to be brave and do their part, because so many people have done their part through this pandemic. That this is something that you can do to make the world a safer and better place. Talking about your son, I was reflecting on the fact that my daughter Ella just turned 12 last February, almost a year ago, and therefore, as vaccinations were starting for 12 plus, she wasn't yet 12, and she was very, very 11. We weren't vaccinating yet, even her age range yet. But by the time we got around to June, July, she was ready to get vaccinated. But I'm aware of that. Well, what do you mean your vaccines are ready for 12 to 100-year-olds? I'm not 12 yet. I'm like, it's okay, Ella, you're gonna get there in February, and we will be at your age range anyway in February. So this anticipation of getting vaccinated was really, really important in our family. And my son Zav, who's now 14, got vaccinated as soon as he was able to, and Ella as well. They both got actually Zav made an appointment. Ella got her vaccination to school. There was a sense, there wasn't even much of a question or a doubt about it. It was just, this is what we do, this is how we get back to. They were all getting pretty tired of all the restrictions, and even though they knew that vaccination wasn't going to suddenly make all those restrictions disappear, and it hasn't, it has so clearly impacted the path that this country has been able to take through these latest waves. We are so much better off now because Canada is one of the countries with the top levels of vaccination in the world, because so many Canadians have stepped up and done the right thing for themselves, for their families, for their neighbors. My kids were worried about seeing their grandparents because my mom was facing health challenges through this. My in-laws were as well, and having that level of protection, of responsibility, of being part of it was really, really important for them. And like I said, my 7-year-old is very, very eager to be able to join his older brother and sister in doing his part.
One has to be very, very cautious before deploying military in situations engaging Canadians. It is not something that anyone should enter in lightly. But as of now, there have been no requests, and that is not in the cards right now.
All right, so to help break down Trudeau's very squirmy little movements there and behavior, former U.S. Army interrogator and behavior and body language expert, our friend Greg Hartley is here. Greg, what do you make of that? We don't have a lot of body to show you. It's just his head, but what do you make of it?
Well, yeah, his face is very expressive, though. Is he reading or is he responding to a question? Hard for me to tell, but he stammers through it either way. And if he's reading, he misreads a word, which is interesting. Watch his blink rate. We associate blink rate with stress. As your eyes dry and your blink rate increases. Usually our average is somewhere around 18. In this video, his is around 45. And there's a real increase when he says using the military against Canadians. His brow goes up for like a request for approval, like he's uncertain how he's perceived. And then he uses some really unfortunate words that you don't expect to hear from a world leader. right now. We're not going to use the military right now. I surely don't want to hear that from our president.
No, surely not. All right, so this is something I haven't heard you say, so just a little inside baseball. As an Army interrogator, do you videotape the people you're interrogating, and did you literally do the math on how many times they're blinking? Is that part of the study?
No, usually you can do it sitting across from them because you're watching them and you're paying attention to how quickly their blink rate is going. And you don't really usually keep up the number. I just gave you a number because I'm watching a video, but you can tell because people's eyes start to suddenly blink very quickly. And it's associated with fight or flight and with processing negative information.
All right, let me play you the next one. This is him about attending protests, specifically Black Lives Matter protests.
I have attended protests and rallies in the past when I agreed with the goals, when I supported the people expressing their concerns and their issues. Black Lives Matter is an excellent example of that.
So I just have to say, no damage in Parliament Hill and $2 billion worth of damage at BLM, but we're doing body language here. So what do you make of that clip?
Yeah, so there's uncertainty right at the beginning. You see him raise his brow about how he'll be perceived. And then he's got discomfort. See him doing what I call the chained elephant. If you think about an elephant chained up, how they sway and move in their bodies, that's a way of releasing nervous energy, and it shows stress. And then there's also this concern that shows up in his brow when he's talking. You can see it knitted. And then he breaks eye contact down. I associate that with uncertainty of perception.
Interesting. Okay, I want to get one more in here. This is on the other side of the aisle, literally in Canada. I've become a big fan of this woman. Her name's Candice Bergen. She's a politician in Parliament there. Listen to her back up the truckers.
I do get very defensive of Canadians who are outside today, patriotic, peace-loving Canadians who are called misogynists and racist by the Prime Minister. So again, I will ask the Prime Minister, who may I remind this House wore blackface on more times than he can remember, apologize to the peace-loving, patriotic Canadians who are outside right now.
All right, I take away confident and angry, Greg.
Yeah, beautiful read. That's exactly what you see here. She's illustrating with her hand. She's making her point. She's pointing to where she's going. She exposes her teeth. That's anger. She has her chin up in defiance. When her brow comes up, it's you're getting what I'm saying, correct? Her cadence, tone, and pitch all illustrate what she's saying. And then even at the very end, she does an emphatic hand down left side. Look at all that movement, her rigid body. It tells you, yes, she's angry, yes, she's on message, and yes, she's passionate.
I'll tell you what, I'd rather have her leading me than Justin Trudeau leading me any day of the week. Canada should take notice of that woman.
Countries around the world are opening up, even countries with lower vaccination rates than Canada. Provinces are beginning to lift restrictions and getting life back to normal. Why? Because they're following the science. Canadians are ready to get their life back. But it seems like the Prime Minister wants to live in a permanent pandemic. Dr. Ham, Dr. Tam, Dr. Henry, Dr. Moore, Dr. Hinshaw, Dr. Shahab all agree it's time to shift out of the restrictions and back to normal life. So why is the Prime Minister so offside, not only with the science, but it would seem like with a growing number of his own MPs?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we intend to follow the science and are working closely with Dr. Tam and other public health officials to ensure that we get through this pandemic as best we possibly can. And that has been through vaccinations. The fact that 9 out of 10 Canadians have gotten vaccinated is one of the reasons why we're able to get through this, is why we've been able to prevent our health systems from being completely overrun. Vaccinations are the thing through this. That's why we're continuing to encourage Canadians to get vaccinated. Why, unfortunately, the Conservatives are against vaccination is, quite frankly, beyond me.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the science and the evidence is just simply not on the Prime Minister's side. Many of the reasons previously used to keep Canadians under restrictions are vanishing before our eyes. Other countries are opening up. Provinces are opening up. As he just said, 90% of Canadians have the vaccine. The Prime Minister needs to put his ego aside. He needs to do what's right for the country. He needs to end the mandates. He needs to end the restrictions. He needs to listen to his own caucus. Will he do that?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister, because he's talking about vaccinations, we all support vaccines, and 90%, as he has said, 90% of Canadians have been vaccinated. Yep. Is he suggesting that unless 100% of Canadians are vaccinated, he's not even going to consider opening up and lifting restrictions? Yeah. Is that what he's trying to tell us? 90% is good for us, and I would say other countries in the world who have less vaccine uptake. Is he saying he's not going to do anything until 100% of Canadians are vaccinated? Really?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Not only are Canadians tired of this pandemic, of the challenges we're facing, but they are also, of course, tired of the restrictions, tired of the rules, tired of the lockdowns. That is understandable. But you know what helps lift restrictions? You know what helps move beyond lockdowns? Vaccinations. When Canadians get vaccinated, including with our vaccine mandates that ensure the federal public service and anyone getting on planes or trains are vaccinated, that has helped move forward, keep Canadians safe, and most importantly, to keep our frontline health workers who've been heroes during this pandemic from being overwhelmed.
The Prime Minister is planning to invoke the Emergencies Act to deal with the current protests in Ottawa and in some parts of the country. We know the protests continue here in Ottawa. We know the Windsor border has been reopened. We know that last night there have been arrests in Coutts. Section 16 of the Emergency Act refers to threats to the security of Canada. Given this context, does the Prime Minister think that these protests constitute a threat to the security of Canada? And if not, does he think that with this news, he could be escalating rather than de-escalating an already inflamed situation? We've been asking the Prime Minister to stop dividing, stigmatizing, and name-calling people he disagrees with. Let them know that he listens and that he hears them, but he refuses to do that. Today we are voting on a Conservative motion, a reasonable motion that asks the government to present a plan for a reopening by the end of the month. This should be a time of optimism and joy for Canadians, not division and fear. Can Canadians count on the Prime Minister to do the right thing and today stand up with us, support our motion, and give Canadians the hope that they deserve so much?
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Public Safety correctly stated, it was the Windsor Police and law enforcement in Alberta that are diffusing the illegal public infrastructure blockades that have traumatized Canadians. In fact, it's not been the federal government. In fact, the Prime Minister has been inflammatory at best and unresponsive at worst as this crisis has mushroomed and traumatized Canadians. How can the Prime Minister justify asking for unprecedented power through the Emergencies Act when he's failed to exercise leadership with the authority that he already has?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
I want to make something very clear. The illegal blockades seeking to take our neighborhoods and our economy hostage, and the collective COVID fatigue we are facing are two very separate things. If you joined the protests because you're tired of COVID, you now need to understand that you are breaking laws. The consequences are becoming more and more severe. You don't want to end up losing your license, end up with a criminal record, which will impact your job, your livelihood, even your ability to travel internationally, including to the US. We've heard your frustration with COVID, with the measures that are there to keep people safe. We've heard you. It's time to go home now.
Your 16 seconds are up. I'm going to ask you again because nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. You've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
How much?
has
just the dollar figure.
Throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
In various ways, and is
how much
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How much? I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me.
You don't know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million. Really?
Can I answer this, Paul, yet?
I'm waiting. You haven't done an answer so far. Let's make this the first one.
My mother has worked as an advocate.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Speaker for
how much?
Many good organizations across the country.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are being asked a direct question at a parliamentary committee.
Support her because she does her own work, and I'm
point of order. Point of order.
But I do not feel that it is my responsibility to peer into the work my mother is doing, because I have
point of order to suspend.
She's doing.
Point of order to suspend.
I've come to learn that the chairperson's power has gone out and is no longer part of this meeting. May I propose that we?
It's okay. We can keep. Prime Minister and I can continue talking.
No.
I suspected that might be a problem. It's very convenient timing for the lights to go out. Look, I got a message to the effect that his power has gone out. I have no reason to distrust him.
I hope you don't pull the fire alarm now.
Yeah, well, look, there's no intent in my own private home here in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have a fire alarm. I propose
the general process is that the vice chair assumes the chairing of the meeting. So we'll continue.
And that would be me. So we'll continue the meeting, and I now give the floor to the member for Carleton. Mr. Prime Minister, you have, I'm going to ask you one last time, how much did your family get from this organization? How much?
Have you read the Conflict of Interest Act, Mr.
Yes,
Polya?
I have.
How does it define family?
I'm asking you.
How does it define
you how much your family got.
The Conflict of Interest Act defines family as spouse and direct dependents.
Point of order. So you're not going to answer that question.
Point of order.
So you're not going to answer the question then. So you're not going to answer the question about how much your family received. Okay, you're right.
Hold it, gentlemen. If you.
For working with we, and it was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner ahead of time.
Okay.
Mr. Polya,
can I welcome back Wayne Easter? Can I welcome back Wayne Easter, a man we've deeply missed? Come on, Wayne, where have you been?
Look,
I had things under control for you while you were gone.
I imagine that, Pierre, it wouldn't be the first time you tried to put my lights out, and that's exactly what happened, Pierre. We got a thunderstorm here. Anyway, where will you're well into your 5 minutes, but go with one last question.
Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to conclude by asking you. You claim that you have no knowledge of the amount that has been paid in expenses to your spouse. You correctly pointed out that the Act defines family as including a spouse. Therefore, you know you're under investigation regarding the Act. I'm going to ask you again, how much in total, and I'm looking for a dollar figure here, sir, how much did your spouse receive in reimbursed expenses or other benefits from this organization? How much?
Your original question, Mr. Polya, was how much was my immediate family?
I asked you a different question now. How much?
Mr. Polya, the Prime Minister has the floor.
My wife has never been paid since I was Prime Minister.
Reimbursed for expenses.
Mr. Polya, could we please have order? We'll allow the Prime Minister to answer the question, and then we'll move on to Ms. Zerowitz. Sorry, Julie. Mr. Prime Minister, you have about 30 seconds here.
The Ethics Commissioner has fully cleared my wife to continue her advocacy and her work with We Charity and other organizations.
How much?
In the kind of work that she's been doing all her life.
Just the dollar figure.
She's doing it unpaid for We. She is not being paid by We for her advocacy or for her podcasts. They are simply reimbursing her for expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.